The production of these is highly concentrated, often in the hands of a single country, and often that country is China.
From the Times, this is the World in 10 podcast. With me is Rohitesh Dhawan, CEO of the International Council on Mining and Metals. Ro, we hear so much about rare earth minerals now. What's behind the scramble for mineral rights that's going on?
It's an increasing recognition, Stuart, that everything our life depends on, from defense technology to renewable energy to the homes that we live in, are all dependent on rare earth minerals and other critical minerals that come from the ground. And there's an increased concern that these could be weaponized in the current geopolitically tense times we live in. A reason for that is that the production of these is highly concentrated, often in the hands of a single country, and often that country is China. Rare earths, for instance, more than 95% of the supply of these critical materials is either mined by or processed by China or Chinese-linked entities. And so the concern is that as geopolitical tensions increase, that these could be restricted in being able to be accessed by Western countries, which could undermine our ability to develop defense technologies, renewable energy, or even electric.
We see, away from China, Greenland, which is bracing for that visit of the high-profile US group, Usha Vance, the Vice President's wife, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. How much is this push for the US to be independent of China affecting the Trump administration's position on Greenland here?
Critical minerals are definitely part of the calculation of the Trump administration's interest in Greenland. It is a largely unexplored country, but one which is known to have significant reserves of these minerals. And so the Trump administration would be thinking that by getting access to those minerals, it improves the resilience of the US economy and its independence from China. That being said, it's not the only factor when it comes to Greenland, because Greenland is strategically very important as a base in the region. And so I think we shouldn't overplay the importance of minerals to that conversation, but it is absolutely a core part of it. It's also, of course, a core part of the deal that the US administration is seeking to do in Ukraine, which would give the US access to Ukraine's reserves of critical minerals. It must be noted, however, that the known deposits in Ukraine are still subject to a lot of uncertainty, because we have to rely on 1980s era Soviet maps of what is or isn't under the ground, and it would take at least a couple of years for any company to get high confidence in what is actually under the ground. And the other country, Stuart, where there is significant interest in minerals from the United States is the Democratic Republic of Congo, where in the eastern part of the country there is an ongoing conflict with M23 rebels. And here too, there have been discussions between the US administration and the DRC government that have been reported that have to do with some form of a security for minerals swap that the United States may be seeking to do with the government of the DRC.
If we think about that deal that Donald Trump is talking up between the US and Ukraine, is the president right to suggest that having American mining contractors there might offer Ukraine some security protection?
The US administration believes that by having American companies on the ground operating in Ukraine would bring with it a set of security and broader infrastructure that could improve the security of Ukraine overall. It could also be the case that by having American companies that tend to follow high standards of mining, that the benefit of that mining to Ukraine could be more broadly shared as well as more sustainable than if that mining activity was to be done by companies from countries that don't have as high standards, while at the same time taking care of the environment in Ukraine, which can be at risk if mining is not done well. And finally, the presence of American or other Western companies could bring with it the development of broader infrastructure, which could have second-order benefits for Ukraine's stability, like the development of power infrastructure, roads, the rebuilding of bridges. These have been traditionally parts of the kinds of investment that American companies have made in the countries in which they mine. So in addition to the direct presence of companies on the ground, the second order and ancillary benefits could indeed improve the stability of Ukraine.
What are the timescales like to get the infrastructure that you mentioned built and to get those minerals out of the ground?
We're looking at least 2 years for the necessary initial planning and scoping studies before you have shovels in the ground. And then once your first shovel goes in the ground, it could take anywhere between 2 and a further 5 years to create a large-scale mining operation. So that means we're probably looking at a minimum of 5 years before we can see minerals being shipped from the Ukraine to anywhere, and that's on the optimistic side. Globally, in fact, it takes about 15 years from initial discovery to first production of large mining projects. A lot of that time is taken in granting mining permits. Now, if there's a special deal between the US and Ukraine, that timescale is likely to be shortened, and therefore, in an optimistic scenario, you could see minerals being produced and exported from Ukraine in 5 years.
Once you get that permitting done, that 5 years feels like quite a long time still. Is it just difficult to mine these materials?
It's difficult to mine them responsibly. So you could do it quicker were companies to cut corners in making sure that the groundworks are stable, that the dam where you would store the waste rock from mining is well constructed, that groundwater sources are being protected from any harm, that the explosives activity that a company's mining is being done in a responsible way so as to not destabilize others. These are essential steps that should not be shortcutted, otherwise they could cause real harm to people and the environment, and it does take time. So yes, 5 years it may seem long, but in the context of these quite significant advanced industrial projects, is, I think, what is reasonable to expect for responsible companies.
So 2 of these countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Ukraine, are embroiled in massive conflict right now. Hypothetically, what would a mining company do if where they were working was embroiled in active conflict?
You know, in high conflict situations, a mining company may choose to either not engage at all, or if they are already present, then to withdraw, because it could put the safety of the site and its people in jeopardy if that conflict can't be well controlled and managed. In other cases, mining companies can be part of the solution to conflict-related initiatives, either by providing a space to convene different parties or by helping support peacemaking processes. And let's also be honest, Stuart, that in some cases, mining can be a driver or a multiplier of conflict if that's not well managed. In the wrong hands, these minerals can be used to finance war and illegal trade, and they can also be a source of tension in the local community. So it really does vary all the way from not being able to operate at all to being a constructive partner, and in some cases also being a multiplier of conflict. And therefore, a company needs to think very carefully about the situations in which it goes into a country, and if there is conflict in that country, the conditions under which it's prepared to stay.
These 2 countries also have historically poor records on battling corruption, particularly around extractive industries. Another move that Donald Trump has made recently is tearing up some of those rules on bribery overseas, particularly with US-based companies. Just how much of a retrograde step is that?
It's an unfortunate step because it removes a very powerful expected signal of good practice from companies. That being said, responsible companies will not change their practices as a result of that step. Those that have already committed to the highest standards of transparency and anti-corruption will stay the course and should stay the course, because not only is that the right way to do business, but it is actually completely in their best interest to do so, because corruption of any form weakens the governance in the places in which you operate, which ultimately is bad for your business. And so, through initiatives like the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, to which all 24 companies of ICMM are committed, we have a mechanism by which we can ensure that the revenues are flowing the way they should, that there are no illicit or corrupt activities taking place, and that the citizens of host countries get to understand what money is being generated and how that's being used. And I'm pleased to say that certainly the 24 companies of ICMM have committed to applying that standard, whether or not the host government is a EITI member, and that is what responsible companies should be doing.
You touched on the fact that some countries who operate in this space perhaps don't have as high standards as the ICMM members that you touch on. Are we at risk of tearing up landscapes and countries with this hunt for electric battery components?
It's certainly a risk, but it doesn't have to be that way. When it's not done well, mining can be a destructive activity. It can cause pollution in waterways, loss of biodiversity, and harm to human health. When it's done responsibly, those risks can not only be managed very well to minimize the downside, but it could actually be the case that thanks to mining, human health, animal health, and the health of our natural planet is actually made better because responsible companies invest back into those natural environments and take care of people. And we have many examples around the world of mining having been done responsibly and well, but equally we do have, unfortunately, many examples of mining having been done irresponsibly and having caused that harm. So we should all be vigilant to make sure that as we increase mining to supply the world with the essential materials necessary for defense and the energy transition, that is always being done with a minimum bar of responsible mining. And if it can't be done responsibly, then it shouldn't be done at all.
The clean energy transition, as you say, is crucial for the fight against climate change. How much is climate change driving this gold rush of seeking these minerals?
Climate change does increase the demand for key materials, especially materials like copper, and it comes on top of a baseline of demand that was already growing because of a larger and more urbanized global population. Now, in some cases, the demand from the energy transition is coming on top of an already tight market, even though the actual change from the energy transition isn't that great. So, for instance, only 4% of the copper we produce is used to produce wiring and other electricals for cars. If we are to electrify our cars at the pace needed for the energy transition, that would go from 4% to 12% by 2030. So a sizable jump, but still only 10% or slightly more of overall copper demand, which may not sound like a lot, but you have to remember that we are already tight in the supply of copper. So that additional demand does potentially tip us over the edge into a market that could be very short of this essential material. So in other cases like lithium, it's a much greater share of lithium demand is coming from energy transition needs. And what we need to remember is that in the future, these materials could go into energy transition technologies, or they might be required to build roads, bridges, defense technologies, homes for a population that is trending towards 9 billion people, with more people living in cities. And what we know, Stuart, is that in developing countries, the per capita consumption of these metals and minerals is far lower than the average of the richer world. And those people in developing countries rightly deserve an opportunity to have the same standard of living that we do, which means that the increase in demand for commodities is likely to come from those people wanting to live in houses, in cities, and enjoy a decent standard of life. And on top of that will be the demand from the transition to a lower carbon economy.
There's another executive order from Donald Trump coming that's going to push for new shipbuilding, including icebreaker ships. As the ice melts around the Arctic, we see the prospect of new shipping routes. Will that make a big difference to get those commodities you mentioned to markets?
It could help, certainly, because at the moment, shipping of commodities from places like Brazil to China, Australia to China, or from Africa to America does add significant cost and time to bringing commodities from where they are to where they need to be used. And so the opening up of new shipping lanes could reduce the cost and the time taken and improve the availability of commodities from where they are to where they're required. Safer shipping lanes than those that currently exist could also reduce the risk of piracy and other reasons why global shipping could be a threat. And at a time when countries in the West are seeking to secure the supplies of these essential materials, then having a greater level of control over the seaways that they come on would be a sensible strategy for countries to adopt.
And clearly, the state of those seaways, if there was to be a sustained US-China conflict, will be another big issue. How worried are the big mining and metals firms about the prospect of that conflict?
It's always on any sensible company's risk register to watch for potential disruptions to maritime supply chains, because although these commodities are not perishable, we only do hold certain quantities of their stocks. And so if there was a short-term disruption to shipping lanes, while there wouldn't be an immediate crunch because there are stocks of copper and lithium and other produced metals in warehouses around the world, if it was sustained for a long period of time, that would certainly harm companies who need these metals to produce products like car companies or defense firms or medical equipment manufacturers, and it would harm those that produce them because there would be limited space to stockpile them where they are produced. And while you could theoretically shut a mine down if you didn't need to produce all the commodity, it's much harder, for instance, to shut down a smelter that produces aluminium, because it can't just be turned on and off given its needs to function on a constant basis, the need to control temperatures very carefully, and the fact that metals don't react very well to rapid changes in temperature. So it certainly would be very disruptive, even though the likelihood of it happening is low.
Dhawan of the International Council on Mining and Metals, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Stuart.